Now, of course, in every project, every client, again, depending on its size and what's involved, he might have his own support team. I always sort of try and separate that thinking out as a client development support team. They're his own back office staff that he has working, and they come in all forms. And it's worth highlighting for you also that the size, again, and complexity associated with your project will dictate various types of other players that may be brought into the development project by your client. And of course, they will have an impact on how you do things, not negatively, but there will be an overlap of activities. Now, and if your client is an experienced developer, whether large or small, they will have a good understanding as to what additional expertise will be necessary to have in place for a given project. Remember, your remit as a design professional, that is the lead consultant, will be to collaborate with other construction professionals. That comes with the job, I'm afraid. There are various views and opinions expressed within the construction industry as to the status and value the architect brings to the table. Just so you know what to expect, I've had various views and opinions expressed in many different ways. Now, by the way, you may not like the ideas of others having views about architects, but that's the way of it, as I alluded to earlier. And speaking of views and likes, Mario has asked me to mention, if you like what is being shared with you in this video so far, your like is also much appreciated, and apparently it's very helpful with the algorithm machine thing. It helps getting the information out there to others, and naturally we'd like to do that. Other players in the mix, as I was referring to earlier, might be a project manager, could be site agent, cost controller, of various levels of intensity. It usually starts with a quantity surveyor, but not all. Some contractors have cost controllers that are not necessarily RICS quantity surveyors. And of course you'll have health and safety advisors, and you may have selling agents appointed by the client, and other consultants too, connected more directly with the overall development delivery process, but not necessarily with the design and specification elements of the development project that we're referring to here. That would be really under the remit of the architect, which is your appointment. Now, you would be the architect or the lead designer. But let me help differentiate here between the use of the word architect for the project and that of lead design consultant. You've obviously heard that mentioned. Well, whilst the word architect will always apply to every project, large or small, lead design consultant will apply where a project is of such a size and complexity with other specialist design consultants will be required. Clearly there is there's a usual requirement for a structural engineer, the building services engineer, maybe. Now I say maybe with regard to building services because there are a number of ways of dealing with building services for a specific project, and not every project dictates the necessity to engage a building services engineer consultant. And again, I'll discuss that in other videos because I know it's important. But they are nonetheless a member of a design team for many projects. So specialist design therefore represents a sphere of specific design expertise that is clearly outside the design expertise of the architect, which is you. The design of a theatre, for instance, will necessitate specific design expertise beyond that of an architect. Usually, I have found, unless you're a specialist architect that deals in nothing else but theatres. The specialist knowledge required for lighting, acoustics and seating arrangements and sightlines, etc. is not an everyday occurrence for an architect, and usually outside his or her level of design expertise. Some of us might become experts in certain specialisms. I have my own. It's not theatre design, I might add, but it is something else. We can talk about that some other time. Equally, to give you another example, a swimming pool complex will always benefit from the knowledge and expertise of a pool design specialist in terms of its structural engineering, mechanical services, which are phenomenal for a pool. I didn't realise that when we got until we were appointed for a very big pool complex, and specialist specification requirements also. I was delighted we had a pool specialist actually. It was I will have to say it was a godsend really. I could sort of just breathe and control the design coordination much easier. I'm not a pool specialist. How could I be? So you bring that in, or the client brings it in, rightly so, and you advise your client to bring it in. So there we are. So I'm going to move on now and start talking about why you need to be collaborating with others. For you as the architect downstroke lead design consultant, however, your focus will be on matters relating to the overall design coordination of the building. I just mentioned that a few moments ago. And although there may be other activities or even design aspects about the development project that will overlap, your remit as the lead design consultant will be essentially to coordinate your architectural design as a structural design, building services, and any other specialist design into the total design of the building. That's your responsibility, and this will require you to collaborate with others. Now, they may not necessarily be in your immediate design team. You know, as I said, there could be specialists, and you have to collaborate with them on behalf of your client. The primary issue for an architect will be recognizing where your responsibility begins and ends as the lead design consultant. But I would suggest your responsibility will always be for the overall design coordination and input of specialist expertise into your architectural design. Taking a close look at the planning process and the role of architects specifically when it comes to preparing a planning submission and obtaining a planning decision. And again, on the nature and extent of your project, its size and complexity, etc., will dictate at what point do you introduce any specialist design consultant into the initial design process. So you can see there's an overlapping here, timing of when do you actually bring them in, when is it prudent to bring them in. Not too late, I hope, otherwise you've missed the boat. I would also suggest you assess this requirement at the front end of the design process, namely pre-feasibility and during feasibility stage, because your site may have suspected soil contamination, for instance, or asbestos content perhaps. Equally, you may determine you will need some crucial measurements and levels at the front end of your design process, and you will have to explain to your client that and obtain your client approval, because there is a cost implication for this information up front. And you'll find that some clients will say, can you not do that? And you can, well, you know, you have to be a bit careful about certain aspects of information you're going to put in to your initial feasibility considerations and then onto your concept development. You do need at times, depending on the nature of the project, that level of expertise, which is not your gift, is the gift of another specialist. I will refer to this again when we are focusing on the feasibility study in depth, which is a future video in this series. So I hope by now you have noticed that I do not refer to obtaining planning permission. And the reason is very simple. It is because you are not in a position to offer your client a guarantee, since the UK planning system is discretionary and not regulatory. I will refer to this specific topic in a later video again as part of this video series, because it is important to be able to distinguish and differentiate between the two and indeed what they mean. Now, what I'm about to tell you in the next 3 slides, I think, is important, so I want you to listen up. With all that is happening during the time of your initial engagement, with your client that I referred to in the previous slides, and getting the feel of what your client is seeking to achieve, you need to have in the back of your thinking, the back of your mind, the notion of formalizing your working arrangement as soon as possible. This should have a place of priority. I can't overemphasize it. I'm going to keep emphasizing it. So this is what we are going to discuss next in this video, because this is what comes next in the appointment process, and that is even before you become involved in detailed research for preparing the planning submission.